devotional. Thank you for joining with me today as we study again in the Gospel of Matthew. And today we are going to look at just 4 verses. We're not looking at a lot today. We're going to look at chapter 8, verses 18 through 22. Let me give you a little of the context of what was going on. Jesus had finished his teaching, his Sermon on the Mount. After he finished that teaching, we move into this transitional time as far as in the writing of the Gospel of Matthew, and he is using this time to demonstrate who Jesus really is, that he really is God, that he has all the power that God has. And he does 2 little sections in the Gospel of Matthew chapter 8. The first section he does is on healing. He heals a different groups of people. And you saw yesterday that Jesus healed 4 different types or groups of people. First, he healed a Jew who had no social or religious privileges. He was a leper. He had been inflicted with leprosy, and it was forbidden to touch him or even be near him, and Jesus healed him by touching him. And then he healed the servant of a Gentile officer, a Roman centurion. The Romans were the occupying force, the oppressing force in Israel, and yet Jesus had compassion and healed this man when he recognized the great faith that this man had. Then he healed a Jewish woman, happened to be his mother-in-law. It was the mother-in-law of Peter. I'm sorry, not Jesus's mother-in-law. It happened to be the mother-in-law of Peter. Peter, all it says about her is that it was no faith that was requested, no request that was made of Jesus. It was just simply Jesus having compassion and touching this Jewish woman and healing her body out of love and compassion. That's what he does. And then there were the 4th group, and that was the unnamed people. It was a variety of unnamed people with unnamed illnesses and sicknesses, and Jesus healed all of them. And so it showed and demonstrated that Jesus has power and authority over the physical. He has power and authority to heal, to bring healing to people, not just healing in a physical manner, but healing in a spiritual manner. The end of Matthew chapter 8, we're going to see that Jesus is going to demonstrate power over a storm and power over demons. And so Jesus has power in not only the supernatural realm, but he has power in the physical realm as well. And that is because Jesus is God. He is the creator God. And part of faith is believing in who Jesus says he is, that he is not just a good man. He is truly God incarnate, God in the flesh, who has come down to bring healing to the world. When you trust in him, when you put your faith in him, that's where salvation happens. It's not by our own works and by our own efforts. It is salvation through the faith that we have in Jesus. It is by his grace and his grace alone. Now, sandwiched in between those 2 things, where you have the power that Jesus shows over the physical, over the healing, and then you have Jesus doing incredible miracles, the power over a storm and power over demons. Sandwiched in between that is 4 verses that deal with the what I would call, it deals with the cost of discipleship. What does it cost to be his disciple, and what does it cost to be his follower? There is a cost to following Jesus. Grace, the grace of God, is a free gift. It is freely given. But that free gift, if we receive it, we have to receive the requirements of the gift. Jesus didn't pay the price and the penalty for sin with ease and no suffering. He suffered. He went to the cross. He went through incredible pain and turmoil. He came down out of heaven. All of it cost Jesus incredibly. To leave the presence of his Father, to come out of heaven and come to earth, that's an incredible inconvenience. It's an incredible cost that Jesus paid. To be in the body of man, to grow up in a family, to go through the turmoil and the dysfunction of living in a broken and fallen world. That cost Jesus for the 33 years that he was on the earth. It cost him not only that presence with his Father in perfection, but to come into a sinful world around sinful people. Incredible cost. And then he went through the suffering and the pain. He went through the whipping and the beatings, and all of that cost Jesus dearly. He offers the gift to us, the gift of grace, the free grace that he gives. But that free grace, though it cost Jesus everything, there is also a cost to us. It's not that we are paying it to try to earn the favor of God and to earn his forgiveness. It is our response to what Jesus has given to us. And I want you to look at this. In Matthew chapter 8, verses 18 through 22, here's the words that we read. And when Jesus saw great multitudes about him, he gave a command to depart to the other side. Then a certain scribe came to him and said to him, Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go. And Jesus said to him, Foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. Then another of his disciples, this is not the 12, by the way. The word disciples is used for the multitudes. Another one of the people that were following Jesus, not one of the inner circle, but this person said, Lord, let me first go and bury my father. But Jesus said to him, Follow me and let the dead bury their own dead. So here's what you have. You have sandwiched in between those two types of teaching about the authority and power that Jesus has. You have this little sandwich part in there where Jesus is talking about what it really means to be his follower, what the cost is of being one of his disciples. Now, let's just walk through this and understand this and see what Jesus is saying. The first person that encounters Jesus, the first one that we see him saying, Teacher, I will go with you wherever you go. And I'm sure that he was being sincere about that. He was saying, I will go with you. I will follow you. I'll commit my life to you. I will be a Christian, a Christ follower. I'll follow the Messiah. I'll follow Yeshua Jesus, wherever you're going to go. And Jesus's response was not a response of showing a real thrill of this, not showing a real glamorous picture of what it was going to be like. He gave him a very honest, truthful answer. God is always straightforward, and he's always honest, and he's always truthful. He does not try to build up the scenario more than it really is. He's going to give him the truth, and here's the truth that Jesus gives. He says, "Foxes have holes, birds have nests. I don't have anywhere to lay my head." Charles Spurgeon said this. He says, I wonder if this man thought, well, now I'm a scribe. If I join that company, I will be a leader. I perceive that they're only fishermen, the bulk of them, and if I come in amongst them, I shall be a great acquisition to that little band. I shall no doubt be the secretary. Perhaps he may have thought that there was something to be made out of such a position. There was one who thought so. That's what Charles Spurgeon said. So he's kind of wondering about the motives of this guy to follow Jesus. Again, Jesus' response was not telling him, no, you can't come, no, you can't follow me. He just told him the truth without a glamorized version of what it was like to follow Jesus. This is the opposite technique of many evangelists of the day. You want to present Jesus in a great way, in a grand way. You want to really sell it. You're trying to sell a used car, to somebody. You're trying to sell Jesus. That's what evangelists often do today. But that's not what Jesus did. Jesus just spoke the truth and said, it's not as easy as you think. Are you really willing to follow me? That's the question for all of us. The question is not this easy beliefism where just believe the right thing, go through a mental exercise. It becomes, are you really willing to follow me? Are you really willing to commit your heart to me? If you do, just realize that it's not as glamorous as you think. The end result, eternity, is beyond what any of us can understand. But to walk with Jesus may require us to give up some things. Um, there is a giving up that happens when we follow Jesus. What what if in the giving up all category, when you accept Jesus, what if it's like the person I just listened to a testimony of a person who was a Mormon? He lived in Utah. He had a very successful business, a couple of very successful businesses. He became a follower of Christ. He realized that the Mormon teaching is wrong. It is all about works. There is no grace. He realized that he had no hope, and for most Mormons, they don't have hope because they have to work and hope that they have done enough to make God accept them. Well, that's not what the gospel says. The gospel says if you believe in him, if your life is his, if you ask for his forgiveness, he will forgive you of your sins. But then the result of that is I commit to him. This man who was a Mormon, when he committed to Jesus, he was seen as an apostate of the Mormon belief system. As an apostate, his business was being shunned by all of the community. He lived in a place where it was 90 or 95% LDS. When he renounced his Mormon beliefs and began to follow the God of the Bible, he began to follow what Jesus said, his business was completely gone. He had no more business because all of his patrons were of the LDS faith. They completely shunned his business. That cost him, that decision to follow Jesus cost him everything. It cost him his entire income. It cost him his business. Now, thankfully, he came back and said, but God has been faithful. And though those businesses failed and shut down, I have been able to gain employment elsewhere. My life, God has provided every step of the way, but it cost him everything. There are people, when they accept Jesus, it costs them their family. There are people in the Middle East who, if you accept Jesus, they will treat you like you're dead. You're gone. You have no more life. You will lose any family relationship, any relationship with friends. All of that is the cost of following Jesus. So Jesus says, look, are you willing? Are you willing? If you want to follow me, that is fantastic. We need to make the decision, but you need to realize that in making the decision to follow Jesus, it will cost. For some people, that cost is the friendships. It is a financial cost. What if God says to you, you know what? I want you to go to Africa. I want you to become a missionary in Africa. There's a cost involved there. What if he says, I want you to give up that job that you're doing? It doesn't honor me. Give that up. That's a cost. Maybe he's saying, give up those habits, those things, give up those friendships, those family members. All of those things are costs involved when I make a decision that I'm going to follow Jesus. There's a second analogy that Jesus gives, and he talks about this idea. Not only does the Son of Man not have anywhere to lay his head, the foxes have dens, the birds have nests. I don't have a place. It's going to cost you the same. Are you willing to make that decision? Secondly, though, he says, there's a guy that says to him first, I want to come and follow you. I really want to follow you, but first let me bury my father. And Jesus says, follow me, let the dead bury their own dead. Now, at first glance, that seems like that harsh. The guy's father died. You're not even going to let him have a funeral? He can't go and dig a grave for his father. You can't let him grieve. That seems kind of heartless. But that's not what was going on. The guy's father was not dead. That's not what was going on in the story. Actually, the man was not asking for permission to go do a funeral and dig a grave. He was asking for permission to stay with his father until an indefinite period where his father died. Now that could have been a year, it could have been 2 years, it could have been 5 years, could have been 6 months, could have been 10 years. Nobody knows the extent of it. Jesus was saying, you know what? Let the dead bury their own dead. And what he was saying in that was this, that I know you love your family, but I have to be first in your life. God has required to be in the first position of our lives, that nothing can come before him. Jesus was not afraid to discourage potential disciples. Again, unlike many evangelists of the day, Jesus was more interested in quality than he was in quantity. I'm not worried about the quantity of the number of people who will say yes to this prayer. I'm worried about the ones who will actually mean it and actually be committed and being willing to pay the price. J.C. Ryle says, nothing has done more harm to Christianity than the practice of filling the ranks of Christ's army with every volunteer who is willing to make a little profession and to talk fluently of experience. Basically, it's this. I'm not looking for a few little volunteers. I'm looking for people who are genuinely committed to pay the price, the cost of actually following him. Charles Spurgeon said this: much of the concerns of politics and party tactics and committee meetings and social reforms and innocent amusements and so forth may be very fitly described as burying the dead. Much of this is very needful, proper, and commendable work, but still only such as a form of business as unregenerate men can do, as well as disciples of Jesus. Let them do it. But if we are called to preach the gospel, let us give ourselves wholly to our sacred calling. Jesus is calling us to put him first, in every aspect of our lives. That Jesus, you are first when it comes to my family. You're first when it comes to my job. You're first when it comes to my calling and my vocation. You're first when it comes to the finances that I have. Jesus, you are number one. You're first in every aspect of my life. So that's the cost of following him. Dietrich Bonhoeffer wrote a book called The Cost of Discipleship. If you've not read it, I would encourage you to read it. In the beginning of the beginning of the book, in the first chapter, he writes a chapter entitled "Costly Grace." He talks about two kinds of grace. He talks about cheap grace and costly grace. He says this: that cheap grace is the deadly enemy of our church. We are fighting today for costly grace. Cheap grace is this: it is grace without a price, grace without cost. The essence of grace is that, yes, the account has been paid in full. It has been paid by Christ. Everything can be had for nothing. And since the cost was infinite, the possibilities of using and spending it are also infinite. So what his premise is this: that at Jesus, it cost him everything. But for us, it doesn't cost us a thing. And for most people, they're not willing to change anything about their lives. They're not willing to adjust anything about their lives. They're not willing to give up things of their lives. They want Jesus, and they want to do what they've always done. Yes, I want Jesus, but I want to be just as much of a jerk as I've always been. I want to be just as selfish. I want to be just as much of a drunk. I want to be just as much of an addict. I want to live like the life the way that I've always lived it. But yes, I want to add Jesus into the mix. Dietrich Bonhoeffer says that is cheap grace. You have cheapened the grace of Jesus, the grace that cost him everything. You have cheapened it to the fact that you're not willing to make 1 ounce of effort. He then says that there's a difference. There's something called costly grace. Let me read you the difference. Cheap grace, he says, is the preaching of forgiveness without requiring repentance, baptism without church discipline, communion without confession, absolution without personal confession. Cheap grace is grace without discipleship, grace without the cross, grace without Jesus Christ living and incarnate. Costly grace is the hidden treasure in the field. For the sake of it, a man will gladly go and sell all that he has. It is the pearl of great price to buy, which the merchant will sell all his goods. It is the kingly rule of Christ, for whose sake a man will pluck out the eye, which causes him to stumble. It is the call of Jesus, at which the disciple leaves his nets and follows him. Costly grace is the gospel, which must be sought again and again, the gift which must be asked for, the door at which a person must knock. Such grace is costly because it calls us to follow, and it is grace because it calls us to follow Jesus Christ. It is costly because it costs a man his life, and it is grace because it gives a man the only true life. It is costly because it condemns sin, and grace because it justifies the sinner. Above all, it is costly because it cost God the life of his son, you were bought with a price. And what has cost God so much cannot be cheap for us. Above all, it is grace, because God did not reckon his son to too dear a price to pay for our life, but delivered him up for us. Costly grace is the incarnation of God. I hope that makes sense to you. And I hope that today you'll understand that in this little section, these little 4 verses that are sandwiched in between the power of Jesus, the power over physical healing, the power over a storm and demons, you find Jesus saying, the cost to be my disciple is great. Grace is free. Grace is a gift from God. Grace is what we all need to be able to make it in life. Grace is the gift of God, the forgiveness of God, though we don't deserve it, though we cannot earn it, though we deserve to hang on the cross. The grace of God is the gift offered to us. But that grace cost God everything. It cost him the life of his son, whom he loved. It cost death and suffering. It caused turmoil. It caused excruciating pain. It was not cheap to Jesus. We should not, therefore, cheapen it by the way we live our lives. Grace given by God is costly. And there is a cost to discipleship. Jesus says, the foxes have holes, the birds have nests, I have nothing. Are you willing to give up everything for me? And then he says, you know what? You could put other things first, but let the dead bury the dead and instead choose to follow me. Put me first in your life. I hope you're willing to do that. And I hope you'll join me back here tomorrow as we get into Matthew chapter 8, looking at starting in verse 23, where we look at Jesus having power over a storm and Jesus having power over the demons. Join me back here tomorrow. Thanks for being with me today. God bless you. Have a great day.